Today, I'm going to show you how I make my very own homemade demi-glace. Demi-glace simply means demi is half, glace is mirror. You're taking a sauce, you're reducing it, and you're making it shiny. It's really what it means. You got to start with some bones. Veal is the ideal bone to use, but veal bones are very expensive, but they use them because they're high in collagen, and all that good bone material in those younger cows just make your sauce so much more luscious. But I go to my Asian grocery store and I get beef bones. These are a mix of leg bones and then like the knuckle, cartilage, ligament areas that really gives you a very high collagen production. Totally cool to use instead of veal. You can see good amount of marrow in those bones right there. That's what you're looking for. So to start, we're going to lay these all out onto a sheet pan, and we're going to roast these. Roasting them will give them a real nice brown color, and that's going to really greatly help in your sauce. And look, as you can see, I have an oven now. Totally going to change this channel, so if you've been following it along, you know how big this is. But we're throwing that in at 400 degrees, and that's going to be about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how quickly they brown. On another sheet pan, we're going to take some carrots, some celery, and some onion. We're going to chop those up. We're going to cover them in a little tomato paste. We're going to roast those, and that will also be the basis of the beginning of this stock that we're going to cook. You can take, ideally, in the traditional sense, a demi-glace is a Espanol sauce mixed with a broth and reduced. So this first step here is me just making my own beef broth. This is not technically the demi-glace yet. We're just making beef broth here, and that's the basis of this sauce, and it's good to make your own. I'm going to throw these vegetables into a bowl, though. It's just going to make it easier to cover them in the tomato paste. And once you do that, just get your hands in there, mix them all up. Wear gloves if you want, but you really want to make these coat. It's going to help them brown, and this tomato paste is also very crucial for just the foundations of the sauce. Do it for the carrots and celery also. If you have a bigger bowl, you could do it all at the same time. That is totally fine. But throw those onto a roasting tray as well. Pop that into the oven alongside those bones and let those go. An hour, however long, the vegetables are going to come a little earlier. Here we are about 30 minutes in. You could see some very nice browning and some fat rendering out of these beef bones. I'm going to flip the ones that are really super brown. You can see lots of little pieces breaking off too. There's some meat left over, which is fantastic. That will also break down wonderfully. Now we're going to throw those back in once you flipped them and let them cook just a little longer. We're going to mix the vegetables up a little bit as well. Make sure they're not sticking. Browning on those onions is what you want. You could even let them get a little charred. Here they are at the finish point, and you can see they did start to get a little charred, and that will help your sauce greatly. So now we are going to start to build this stock. We're going to throw these vegetables into the biggest pot you have. This is a 20-quart stock pot. I bought it just for this. I didn't have anything big enough, but I've already loved this thing, and I'm going to use it so much. Get some hot water onto that tray also, though, and scrape up all those little brown bits. That's flavor. It's deliciousness. Do not leave anything on either of these trays. You can see right away it's really coming up with those flavors. And here are the beef bones after just about an hour. They look beautiful. You don't need to go much more than that. We're going to throw in the peels from the onion as well. Those are so good for stocks. And now just fill up those bones. Get every little bit you have there into your stock pot, and we're going to fill this with water, and we're going to make an absolutely delicious beef stock. Do not leave anything on that tray as well. Get everything off. Nothing really stuck, which is nice, but if you did have any fond on there, just pour some water on and repeat that process. But we are now going to fill this up 3/4 of the way with water, which was just about 2 full gallons of water. And the most insane part about this, as you can see where it's filled up to, we're going to bring this to a boil, and we're going to let this simmer 10 hours. Some people will go even longer than that, but from what I've found, 10 hours is just about the max collagen point. Throw a bay leaf in there as well. Trust me, I don't really think they do much, but people guarantee me if you don't throw the bay leaf in there, you will notice. Once it comes up to a boil, give it a good mix, and then drop that heat down and let this just hang out for hours. Here we are about 1 hour in. We're just going to come in and try to drain a little bit of all that scuzz and fat and everything that's kind of rising up to the top. The vegetables like to float, so that gives it a little difficulty to get in there, but any areas where you see fat and bubbles and grossness, just pull those out and throw them to the side. This is what you get after it hardens. I like to go in and scrape it out, and anything that didn't harden is technically good broth, so I'm just going to strain that and throw it back into the pot. But here we are. probably 2-3 hours in, you could see very light little bubbles. That's what you're looking for. If it looks a little too bubbly, turn it down. You don't want to be boiling anything here, but this is just the perfect amount of simmer at this point. Here we are, probably 6 or so hours in. Keep mixing it, keep simmering it, keep pulling out anything. You could see much more fine bits of meat breaking down and bone matter here. That's great. You can see lots of fat on the top. We're going to filter that all out, which is fantastic, but here we are, finally 10 hours in, we're done. I am going to strain out all of the stuff that was in the broth. The reason I like to do this is I like to then reduce the stock that's left over a little more, but I like to do it without any of this in there. It helps just more surface area to boil because you don't have stuff floating at the top. And it allows you to just kind of see the texture, the thickness, all the viscosity of your stock. So I like to pull this out. Make sure you put it into a strainer because you don't want to lose any of that good juice. Put that into something and pour that back in when you're done. But I'm going to leave these kind of thick, fatty, collagen-like pieces still in there just so they have a little extra time to break down. But all the bones and all the vegetables that are totally fine, pull those out, pour in any of those juices that drained out. And we're going to let this now reduce for about another hour or so. Let that just bring it back up to a good simmer, less than a boil, and let it do its thing. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and start to filter this all out. I'm going to use 2 of these colander strainers. If you have a sieve, use that also. But this is the first of 2 or 3 filter points we're going to do. But just start passing that soup through it, that broth through it as much as you can. I know this pot is going to be hot, so use a ladle if that helps. But look at what it's immediately catching. This is the stuff you're trying to get out of that stock. It will really help to make it shiny, beautiful, and not filled with gunk. You don't want, look, that's just from 2 or 3 ladles. As you fill it up, dump it out on the side. Make sure you're cleaning area so you can still pass stuff through. If that fills up, you're not going to get any liquid through it. So just keep doing that. Once you get that whole stock pot filled, you're going to have a good amount of junk. Here we are after that first pass. You're nowhere near done though. Also make sure the stuff you're taking out, you're going to want to filter that also because there's still good stuff into those bones. Now what we're going to do is bring it back from, you're just going to have to keep passing this from item to item here, but we're going to add cheesecloth now, which is going to take a secondary layer of filtration and it's going to really refine this more and more, which is the goal. Cheesecloth though will fill up pretty quickly, so you make sure you have a good amount of it, and you're going to want to, as you pass the broth through it, make sure it's not getting stuck. But that's just the grossness that you're taking out. Those are just fine bits that the metal mesh didn't catch. Now we're going to do it again. This is the second time through the cheesecloth, the third time filtering it. After this, you're done for the time being. If you want to do more, go right ahead, but at that point, you can see a lot of the fat's gone, a lot of the scuds on that top is gone, and now we're going to bring the temperature down. You don't necessarily need to do this. If you have stuff in your fridge that can spoil, the broth going in there hot will raise the temperature of your fridge, so it is helpful to bring it to room temperature. But just look at the viscosity and the thickness of that sauce. It's not just watery. You can tell it has some body to it, and that is the goal. That's where you want at this point. So we're going to cover this up. We're going to let this sit in the fridge overnight, let it become nice and gelatiny and meat jello, and that's where you want to start the next day. Pulling this out of the fridge, here we go. This is the next day. This, I told you, it's a long process, but it's absolutely worth it. You can see a good amount of fat there on the top. Not a ton, but enough. So what you want to do here is just scrape it off. If you lose a little bit of stock, that's totally fine, but just try to get off as much of this fat as you can, because you're going to now melt this down, and we're going to continue the process of actually now turning this into the demi today. So try to get off as much of this as you can, leaving behind as much of that broth as you possibly can, but you want to get that fat off. I'm going to now throw this into my Dutch oven. We're going to bring this up to temperature and liquefy all of this again. I'm going to take some of this and separate it and keep it as just beef broth. But as you can see, the fat doesn't break down as quickly, but it looks beautiful. It looks just as good as it did yesterday. But yeah, I'm making short ribs, which you'll see in a later video, but I'm going to use some of this beef broth for that. While you're doing that, though, we're going to take wine, and we're going to add some shallot to it, and we're going to reduce this by half. You want to use 1/4 the amount of wine as stock you will have. So I'm going to have 2 quarts of stock, which leaves me about 2 cups of wine to reduce. Once that reduces though, pour that in. I'm going to filter out the shallots. You can leave those in there the whole time if you want, but now we're going to bring this Dutch oven up to a nice simmer again, and we're going to reduce this for 3 or 4 hours. You want to really now bring this down to your demi. You don't need to add the red wine. If you just want to reduce that stock all the way down until it is very beautiful, that is totally fine, but I think the red wine flavor is actually beautiful in a dish like this. As you cook it down, scrape those sides down. You don't want to leave any nice bits on the side, but just let this do its thing. Here we are about 2 or 3 hours into the process. You can tell it's already getting some real nice body to it. It's getting a little syrupy. It's leaving a nice trail on the spoon when you wipe your fingers through it. There we go. That's as far as I want to take it. And we're going to do one last level of filtration. I'm going to run it through 3 of these little metal sieves. I'm not going to use any cheesecloth. That's totally fine. But you can tell there's a little bit left over in the Dutch oven, and it's like sticky, and that's the goal. That's what you're looking for. But I'm going to take it. I'm going to leave it in my Pyrex because I don't need it in that big 6-liter, 6-quart container. But look at that. That body is beautiful. It is leaving behind a very beautiful trail, and as it cools down, it will become even thicker, and that's the goal. But we're going to let this also come to room temperature. We're going to cover it in some cling wrap, as you can see there in the back, and we're just going to let this do its thing. Here we are hours later, and it is fully solidified. And this is exactly what you're looking for. I know it took days, but what you're left with is a heavily concentrated, absolutely delicious sauce, and you will not be disappointed with this. It didn't want to come out though, so a good way to fix that problem is get any sort of like offset spatula. You need to get air down to the bottom, which will help it pop out. But there you go, look at that. It's just meat jello. It is so good. Give it a little, pick it up, feel it, it's nice, and put it down, give it a little smack. It's really kind of refreshing. You just see that jiggle, the wiggle of it. This is just absolutely delicious. You can save this for so long. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it up into even pieces. I'm going to make basically half of this, cut it 3 more times. We're going to wrap that in cling film, and you could just store that in your freezer for forever. It's definitely good for at least up to a year. You definitely don't want to waste this for a year though. Use it up. It's so good. It's so worth it. But the way I like to do it is to individually wrap each piece, then throw it into a big Ziploc. It'll reduce the amount of freezer burn it gets, and it'll just kind of give prolonged life to this. And having it in smaller portions will also help in the long run. But yeah, once you do that, throw that into a Ziploc bag. I'm going to show you my little secret for getting the air out. And use one of those big tubs, fill it with water, fully submerge everything. You may know this, but once you submerge it, it's going to force all the air out. So once you do that, close it up, and this is pretty much airtight. Works very well, and it will save a lot of your things from getting freezer burnt. But what I do want to show you quickly is how I use this. So let's say you have a steak, you don't really want to make a pan sauce. Grab one of these, throw it in. You can even throw it into where you cook the steak. I know that's a bad example, but you know, this is just, you take it, you throw it in, and melts down beautifully into, this is probably a solo serving's worth, and a tiny little knob of butter. There's so many options for this sauce that you could really use, but I'm just showing you my favorite way to do it, and it's just to add a little bit of butter. And look at that beautiful color already. Look at that beautiful texture already. This is just so good and so worth having in the house. It is the sauce of the gods. I know it's not technically a mother sauce, but this stuff is the basis for every delicious dish I've ever had. And just look at that body, that texture. Make your own demi-glace. It is so absolutely worth it.